Doctor Who Season 1 is over, but is The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death Russell T Davies' worst finale? Okay, so I've already posted my first impressions on both of these episodes, but what do I think now that they've both aired and we've had more time to think on them? The Season 1 finale sees the Doctor and Ruby arriving at UNIT to try to get to the bottom of a mysterious woman they've been seeing throughout their previous adventures, along with finding out the mysteries around Ruby's birth, leading them into a trap set up by the returning villain Sutekh. But is this story any good? Okay, so The Legend of Ruby Sunday opens up with a red herring of S-Triad Technologies being an anagram for TARDIS technology, which I think was a clever thing to get out of the way in the cold open, as they were already expecting fans to have picked up on this, which they had, but they likely weren't expecting fans to have picked up on the correct anagram, Sutekh, if you can even call that an anagram. But overall, I think this was a very clever thing to get out of the way, and to even have the UNIT team dismissing as something being so obvious and easy, because a lot of the audience already figured it out before this episode had even aired, and so it just shows that Russell T Davies already knew that would be the case, and it's just getting straight into it. We also immediately jump off with the Doctor and Ruby speculating as to whether or not Susan Triad could be the Doctor's granddaughter, Susan, adding to the red herrings in this episode. There's a nice moment between the Doctor and Kate Stewart where they discuss whether or not the Doctor wants it to be Susan, which I personally had hoped would lead to the Doctor choosing to go and see her at the end of the second part, which unfortunately doesn't happen. However, she still does get a mention, with him saying he'll eventually find her one day. My main issue with the Susan Triad stuff in this story is that once she is revealed to be a minion of Sutekh at the end of the first part, that is all she is throughout the whole of the second part. There's no more mention of Triad Technologies or what that was all about, and Triad Technologies was set up in the giggle with RTD hinting that it would have some huge ramifications for UNIT, but ultimately it's never brought up again, with Kate Stewart offering Susan a job at UNIT at the end of the second part, which doesn't make sense knowing she's already a tech billionaire. Ultimately, most of this first episode is just set up for the next part, which for me leads to a pace that is very meandering, with not a lot actually happening, and it mostly taking place all in one location inside of UNIT, which doesn't feel really good on the pacing of the episode. The Sutekh cliffhanger is probably my favourite part of this story. Even though it was speculated that Sutekh would be the main villain of this story, I honestly wasn't sure if it would actually happen, because it was never actually leaked, just heavily speculated based on the Sutekh anagram, the dust in the trailers, and so on. RTD was definitely right when he said to film the reactions to this story, because if I did, you would have seen that I went crazy because I just didn't expect it to actually happen. I also really liked the opening action sequence to Empire of Death. However, everyone dying at the start made it very clear that there was just going to be an inevitable reset button at the end of the episode. When Kate died, I assumed it was possible that that was it for her, but still unlikely. But as soon as Carla, Cherry, and Mrs. Flood, who's hinted at having future plans, died alongside Kate Stewart, I knew that this would all be reset by the end of the episode, which definitely lowers the stakes significantly. As much as I said I loved the cliffhanger to the first episode, I think the first episode could have benefited from the cliffhanger actually being the moment where Kate Stewart dies, because it means the stakes would have felt higher at the end of the episode and shown the power of Sutekh, instead of just removing the stakes at the start of the next episode and making it obvious that there was inevitably going to be a reset button at the end. It also would have allowed for the pacing of the first episode to feel less meandering, as some of the slower moments could have been cut down to fit this moment in as the cliffhanger. As well as this, it would have also allowed us to spend more time exploring the desolation in the second part, as the opening to the second part would have been the ending to the previous part, allowing for more time for this desolation of Earth and other planets to be shown. The moments in the memory TARDIS is nice for the episode to take a bit of a breather, and I love the moment where the Doctor is screaming into the void of space, although this moment would have been more impactful if the Doctor hadn't cried in every episode so far. But it does also make it feel like this episode quickly comes to a halt and doesn't feel as large scale as it could, with us not really getting to see the desolation on Earth from a ground level and feel the stakes. We then have a bit of a time jump where we have a nice human moment with the Doctor and a woman who's all on her own and losing her memories. Like I said, this is a nice human moment for the episode, but once again it would have been nice to see more of the desolation outside of this scene, and ultimately this scene only leads to the Doctor getting a spoon to make the screen work better. We then see Roger Ap Gwilliam from 73 Yards appear on the screen, and for a second I was worried we were going to get answers about 73 Yards, which if you've seen my review on that episode you'll know is something that I don't want. Luckily this is just a small moment that doesn't ruin 73 Yards for me and ultimately has very little impact on that episode, which I'm happy about. Now I know some people are annoyed that this moment wasn't actually in 73 Yards, or even think that it may have been a deleted scene from 73 Yards, but for me this really doesn't bother me, as mandatory DNA testing is something that would be very in character for Roger Ap Gwilliam's authoritarian government, but it maybe still would have been nice to see this moment actually in 73 Yards. After the reveal of Sutekh in the first part, I was really hoping we would see a more classic Sutekh design in the second part. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but I do think he looks a lot better in Empire of Death than he did at the end of Legend of Ruby Sunday. I particularly like the moment where he's leaning over the TARDIS like it's nothing and even spins it around at one point. With all that being said, Sutekh is unfortunately barely in the second part and his presence isn't really felt, but when he is there, he is incredibly voiced by the returning Gabriel Wolf, who absolutely still has it at the age of 91. Now, Sutekh's defeat is definitely one of the most disappointing moments in this episode for most people. I personally don't mind as much him being dragged by a big dog lead and flown through the time vortex. It's something that I think is a nice play on him being portrayed as basically a big dog, and is well set up with the reintroduction of the intelligent gloves and the introduction of the intelligent rope earlier on in the episode. And it also leads to some nice visuals as they're flying him through the time vortex, with the Doctor shouting to him through the TARDIS doors. However, it's definitely odd that they decided to defeat a villain who has been set up to be so powerful in this way, especially when we know that sending Sutekh into the time vortex is how the Fourth Doctor originally thought he had defeated him in the first place, which ultimately ended up not being the case. I also think the explanation for how everybody is brought back to life is very half-baked and not well explained, leading to it ultimately just feeling like a big reset button that magically brings everybody back to life. I think Ruby's mother being revealed to be an ordinary person was definitely the right way to go, and was what I was hoping for. It's a good response to the terrible decision Star Wars made with The Rise of Skywalker by reversing the decision of Rey being a nobody and instead making her a Palpatine. But this does ultimately lead to some questions about things that were set up previously in the season relating to Ruby, such as it snowing around her whenever she thought about the night that she was abandoned, and why her mother was dressed in a cult-like robe when abandoning her at the church on Ruby Road. The moment where she points at the street sign is also very laughable, especially when it was established as being a changed memory earlier on in the season, and the sign not even being visible in the scene in the church on Ruby Road. Ruby's exit is one of my favourite scenes in this episode, and gives a perfect excuse as to why she needs to leave the show, at least for the time being, because as much as she wants to continue travelling with the Doctor, she has more important things going on at home. However, this moment is let down by two things for me personally. Number one, we really haven't had enough episodes or screen time with these two to really establish their relationship and chemistry, with this season only being 8 episodes long and them not always being together in a lot of the episodes. And number two, the Doctor crying, although warranted in this particular scene, is made less impactful due to the fact that he's cried in every episode up until this point, excluding 73 Yards, which he was barely in. And as mentioned earlier, I also think it would have been nice if the Doctor went to see his granddaughter Susan after this moment, as it would have made all the Susan teasing in the previous episode feel a lot less like just a red herring, and more like something that was linked to the themes and arcs of this season, and would have felt like a lot more of a satisfactory payoff to her mentions in both The Devil's Cord and the previous episode. Overall, although I seem to have enjoyed this finale more than most people, it still isn't perfect and is definitely RTD's worst finale yet. Despite the incredible cliffhanger, the first part is mostly set up with a meandering pace, with the second part, although being a fun ride, ends with an unsatisfactory conclusion with the defeat of Sutekh and the reveal of Ruby's lineage that in some ways leaves more questions than answers. If I were to rank these episodes, I'd probably put The Legend of Ruby Sunday at B tier, with The Empire of Death at C or D tier. But let me know what you think about this finale in the comments down below, and let me know what you think about this season as a whole. With that being said, I'd just like to give a shout out to my patron, the Beast Boss. If you want to join the Patreon, I'll have it linked in the description down below, and if you want to see all of my season 1 reviews so far, I'll make sure to have the playlist for those on screen now.